Okay, good afternoon to all of you. It's just 1 past 12, so I'm privileged to say afternoon. I think there are only about 20 adults in this audience, and this is a very adult conversation. So I hope the children will not mind because this is a very serious theme, and I promised friends in the audience that we will throw it open to questions very quickly because it's a concept of India. I mean, you've heard the word idea of India before, but I think we just want to explore where India has been in the past, where it is today, because obviously there are multiple views on that, and of course what is the India of our dreams, our future, etc. And we'll approach it from two perspectives. Okay, and as I said, that's why I said I want you to focus so that you can ask questions. Let me wait till these children settle down. I've never had such a young audience in my life. I think I behave like a headmaster. Children, no noise please. Ekdam chup. Ekdam chup. Okay, I will get started. So let me tell you how we're going to tackle this subject. I mean, very recently, many of you know of the Pune International Center, and we actually collaborated, many thought leaders in the city, to write this very interesting book called India's Pathways to Success, which was literally the past and the present, and a little bit of thoughts on the future. And Rajeev, as all of you have heard, I think is an incredible thinker in terms of his background, training, and what he's doing today. And I'm going to ask him to tell us a little bit about this. I think linking Indian thought over centuries, maybe over a millennium, to where it is today, and I think the India of our dreams, what could go wrong, what could go right, I think everything is really what we're going to talk about today. So let me give you a quick background of our economic thinking on India, and then really hand it over to Rajeev. And this book that we wrote called India's Pathways to Success came about because of a previous book we wrote. And Pune International Center, as many of you know, have heard of Padma Vibhushan Dr. Mashelkar and Padma Vibhushan Dr. Kelkar. They're the president and vice president of PIC. And it's really a thought center which does extraordinary work in terms of events, the work we do with Ministry of External Affairs, with the Asia Economic Dialogue, etc. And this was during COVID times. If many of you remember, China one day without invitation came and squatted in Ladakh. And it kind of brought about this whole period of righteous indignation saying, how dare they do it? What's our response? And again, many of you will remember, we had a magnificent response from the army. But that's when 6 of us got together. That is Gautam Bambawale, who's a former ambassador to China, Ajit Ranade, who's the current vice chancellor of Gokhale Institute, Ajay Shah, whose family founded the Center for Monitoring the Indian Economy, me, and of course Dr. Kelkar and Dr. Mashelkar. And we wrote this very interesting book called saying, Facing Up to China. Can we really respond to China only militarily? Even that would be difficult. Economically, we were like a $3 trillion economy at that time, and China was already close to 15 trillion. So there was no match. And we actually wrote this book which said economically, diplomatically, politically, as well as through military, how do we compete with China? We wrote that book. We got very indignant calls from the Chinese embassy saying, this is not what we are, what are you guys talking about, etc. But interestingly, we got requests from very well-meaning politicians as well as bureaucrats in the government saying, now that you've written about China or India vis-a-vis China, why don't you write a book on what you think should be done in India? So that is the genesis of the term India's Pathways to Success. I mean, my collaborator in that one was a gentleman called Ijaz Ghani, who's again from Delhi, but a very strong economist in the World Bank. And again, we got lots of contributions from various people, including the people I mentioned, plus a few more. And essentially what we covered there was, we looked at the genesis of India. And obviously all of us know that any economy is built around 3 pillars. One is agriculture, which is very strong for India. Then of course manufacturing and services. And as many of you would know today, I think the way we've grown is we've kind of ignored manufacturing. Agriculture is 52% of employment, but sadly very low percentage of GDP. So we looked at each one of these with a microscope with experts and say what is wrong and right with each of these facets. Services, as all of you know, has been one of the mainstays of India. But we looked at manufacturing with a microscope and said, what areas of manufacturing should we be looking at to ensure that we don't over-depend on anybody, including China, and what areas can we really compete in and be very strong in. In addition, we touched upon various peripheral, I wouldn't say peripheral issues is the wrong word, but maybe supportive issues like women's participation. Okay, women's participation, as all of you know. Interestingly, I don't know how many of you know, women's participation since COVID has only gone up in one sector. Anybody know what that is? Sorry? Agriculture, can you believe it? And why? Because many of the girls who dropped out of schools, unfortunately in tribal areas, are now in the fields. And I do a lot of work with this NGO called Educate Girls. And to our horror, we are finding that almost 60% of the girls who dropped out of school naturally during COVID have not gone back. Because the families in the tribal areas have found them so useful in terms of cheap labor at home, in the fields. So it's quite a worry for us. I mean, feminization of agriculture you think is good, but it's actually bad. And as you said, healthcare, a lot of other services, we are seeing the pickup. But as you would have read in the last 6 months, that's also an issue in terms of women dropping out of the workforce, and some COVID habits have kind of remained. And that's something that we're very concerned about. And actually, Uma, who's here, actually wrote the chapter on women's participation in that book. And similarly, we covered many issues. And I'm going to segue into one issue that we kind of stopped at. And we didn't really pronounce judgment, although we are all very judgmental people. But we talked about this issue of trust in the economy. That how do we build a nation where there is adequate trust, where people don't jump onto social media at the drop of a hat and say, oh, this is wrong, that is wrong, without offering solutions. So apart from everything else, I think that's where we stopped. And it's a beautiful segue into what Rajeev is. So Rajeev, I really want to tell the audience a couple of things that you're doing, which is so interesting. And maybe then get into what you think India has achieved or not achieved, politically or whichever way you want to frame it, over the last maybe 75 years.
So, yeah, I'm also not used anymore to talking to an audience which has so many young kids. And I'll try to adapt what I have to say so that they can also participate as much as all the adults are sitting here. I want to begin by saying that in 1947 or 1950, more specifically, India started a unique experiment, something which had never happened before in the world. India was a colonized country. Its economy was very poor. The people were very poor. A lot of them were starving. You must have heard of the Bengal famine. And not only was it a poor country, but it was also a very illiterate country. I think there must be 80% illiteracy at that time. India was also a country which was large and very diverse. Most countries in the world work on the principle that a nation must be bounded together by one language and one religion. India was a new nation. It was a very old civilization, but it's a new nation which had innumerable religions and thousands of languages. So we had deep diversity, not just surface diversity, but deep diversity. And in this poor, illiterate, deeply diverse country, we began this experiment of self-rule, democracy. And this had never happened before in the world. And many people predicted in the 50s that this country will not last. This nation will fall apart. Every nation, in order to succeed, must be homogeneous. It cannot have so much heterogeneity. But India proved them wrong. And I would say that it will, even in future, it will continue to prove them wrong. We will do well despite all the odds, and despite the fact that we are not united by a common language or common religion, that we will turn that diversity into a strength rather than into a major fault line. Now, I thought I'd begin with just briefly telling you what a great experiment we launched and that we are still in. There are blips. We are going. We have gone through several hitches, but I think, as I said, I'm optimistic that this experiment will succeed. Now, what is it in our past which makes me optimistic? And what is it in our past that makes me think that we will face problems in this experiment? I'll briefly tell that, and then I will go, I'll pass the back on to Ganesh and perhaps open the. Now, in the past, there are three major obstacles, right? In the earliest culture, which is not just the culture in India, but a culture which is shared very widely, a culture which was dominated by the warrior ethic. A warrior ethic that is very masculine, which valorizes war, which valorizes conquest, which valorizes the grabbing of territories. That was one, that is something that was that we find in the Vedas. It is, that in the Quranic epics, this idea that you have to, the dharma of the warrior is to conquer territories, and you cannot do that without violence. So it's a violent, very masculine warrior ethic. The Shur, Veer, he was valorized. That's number one. Number two, we had a niti, which is encapsulated in our shastras, the Artha Shastra, a niti where you could, in order to achieve this worldly success, that's what Artha really means. This worldly success is power, fame, wealth. In order to achieve, you don't have to follow any norms, any moral codes. This is among all the ends of life. Moksha was now nowhere in the picture at that time. I'm talking about the earliest times when the Arthashastra was written. The idea of moksha is not present there. Even dharma is barely mentioned. But it's kam and artha, and there are ways in which you have to achieve artha, and those don't have to, there are no principles, there are no moral codes that you need to follow in order to achieve that. Now, that is a tradition that is that is detrimental to what we have in our constitutional ethic. People may valorize the Arthashastra, and there is a lot of very, very interesting things in the Arthashastra. But for me, its major shortcoming is its lack of. There is a certain elevation of immorality there. And finally, we have the Dharmashastra tradition. The idea of dharma is a fantastic idea. The idea that there should be moral norms which should conduct your life, that you should pursue your this worldly goals, but they should always be limited by morality. They should be constrained by morality. There are limits that must be placed on how one must pursue our goals. Nonetheless, the flaw in the Dharmashastra is that this morality was not universal. This morality was jati specific or caste specific. So the Brahman dharma was one, the Kshatriya dharma was another. There was a Vaishya dharma, and there was a Shudra dharma. The dharma of the Shudra was always to be in the service of others. The Kshatriya dharma was to conquer territories and to rule. The Brahman dharma was, of course, to achieve scholarly knowledge and to advise the king and so on. But each of these dharmas were different. There was no universal morality. It was the defense of what we now consider to be the caste order. Now, these you can see are, if we continue with these traditions, we will be warlike, we would we would encourage casteism, and we would also encourage a certain degree of immorality. So while I'm not decrying any of them, there is a wealth of knowledge and wisdom and implicit contradictions in these texts, which must force us to think, the great gap there is between what they explicitly state and what the narratives, the stories in all these texts, what they convey. These are contradictory. But nonetheless, if we follow the explicit ideas, you will find that there is some problem there. There's certainly a problem to our constitutional ethic and so on. But as I said, there were two very, very important things which are also in our tradition. One is pluralism. There have always been multiple ethics, multiple paths to self-fulfillment. Some of them were God dependent, some were gods and goddesses dependent, and some were entirely independent of God. Now, this is something which many of you may not know, that India has been one of the greatest sort of bearers of what today we call the atheistic tradition. Early Buddhism did not believe in God. Early Jain didn't believe in God. The Ajivikas didn't believe in God, and they were in very large numbers. Not only that, even the Vedic philosophy doesn't really believe in God. It believes in riti, a natural order, sustained by ritual. There are gods and goddesses there, but there is no supreme God. Our supreme God is, you can say, is Prakriti, nature. It's the cosmic order. So, and there were great many philosophies like the Mimamsa, like the Sankhya, which you may have heard of. None of them actually justified all this in terms of any God. In fact, they were God deniers. So it's not. What I'm saying is that this is a very vibrant tradition of ancient India. There were people who believed in gods and goddesses, and this is one of the great sources of pluralism in India. The idea that there is one true God and all other gods are false, that idea, which is there in some other traditions, is simply absent in the country. And that is the great source of pluralism that we have, right? And there were also some people who began to think about one God. But this God, this monotheism, was inclusive monotheism. It was not exclusive monotheism. All the gods and goddesses were manifestations of one God. All the gods and goddesses, the names which are given to these gods and goddesses, all these different names are alternative names for one God. So the fact that all these different people who were monotheistic, inclusive monotheistic, polytheistic, and deniers of both one God and many gods, all of them lived together. And very early on, in the ideals of the great Emperor Ashoka, who was not, by the way, a Buddhist emperor. He was a Buddhist upasaka, but his state policy was not aligned to any religion. It was not aligned to Buddhism. He defended all people of all faiths, right? He wanted each one to encounter one another and to learn from one another and become what he called very beautifully Bahushruta. It's a Pali Sanskrit term. Bahushruta means one who listens to the many. You should listen to the many. You should never listen to just one. And by listening to the many, by being open-minded, you not only learn from each other, but you make your faith, your religion, your philosophy, your ethics you make it grow. In other words, implicit in what Ashoka believed is the idea that no philosophy is perfect, that each philosophy is imperfect, and the only way that each philosophy, or what later came to be called religion, each philosophy can grow and infinitely grow only by mutual encounter and mutual learning. And that is what is encapsulated by the idea of Bahushruta. Now, this is a great tradition, and I think that when I began by talking about diversity, the roots of this diversity go really thousands and thousands of years back. Ashoka also was one of the great figures who one might say made the first anti-war statement in the world. He was, of course, a follower of the warrior ethic, but he denounced it after 10 years, knowing what suffering war causes. Much before anybody denounced the idea of war, Ashoka denounced the idea of war. He wanted to spread his ideas, but there are two ways in which the way that he wanted to spread his ideas, and this is unique about India. There were two ways in which were very different. One is no force to impose ideas, and number two, and this is a fantastic thing, you adopt my idea, but you don't have to leave yours. You keep your idea, but also adopt mine. Unlike a whole lot of other philosophy would say, drop yours, take mine. He says, keep yours, but also take mine. In other words, the roots of, and I'm using the word liberalism in a very, very loose way, Udarvad, you can call it, the roots of this liberalism, this open-mindedness, the roots of this lie just here. He was one of the most ancient political liberals. This is one part of our heritage, and the other part of our heritage is a little more complicated. It's full of caste hierarchies. It has got a warrior ethic, which is very masculine, and it has this amoral, right? No universal morals. But both of them, this other ethic, which is, you can call it Hindu, Buddhist, whatever, and the other one, which is also part of the ancient world, both these ethics we inherit. And sometimes we contest each other, and sometimes there can be a fierce battle over the soul of India because of the contestation between these two different ways of looking at the world. It's possible that today we are witnessing that battle. It's possible. I'm not sure about that, but it's possible. And I hope that the one which is much more desirable, much more sustainable, and much more a greater sort of provider of a great ethic and morality to the whole world. I hope that ethic wins. One last thing I'd say, and then I'll give the mic back to Ganesh. And that is that most philosophies and religions in the past have not been very not being kind and generous to two classes of people. One are what we call slaves. There were always slave societies. India also had slaves, the Atishudras, the untouchables, and the other are women. These are two categories of people which have always had, they've always been banished, they've been degraded, they've been humiliated. In any old philosophy, from Plato to any old religion, to our own great texts. You can see the Bible and the Quran, and these are two categories of human beings who have always found not only a place on the margins, but who've always been out. Women a little bit on the margins, and the other Shudras completely out. And I think this is the only thing that I feel very confident about modernity. Modernity meaning, many modernities, including Indian modernity, they have taken this problem on board squarely. We've made sure, and this is the great idea of egalitarianism, that people who have been on the margins in the past, those who've been depressed in their sociological sense, not in the psychological sense, and women, they are to be treated not as subhumans, not as half humans, but as fully humans. And they must be entitled to all the privileges and all the rights and duties that are available to others. And I think this is something that you will not find in any ancient tradition. This is something that is grown only in the recent times, under modern conditions, because of various economic, technological, and social, and now political reasons. So I think I very much hope that in this battle within India of the two major traditions, of which my preference is clearly in favor of one and not the other, and which is more in line with our constitutional ethic, which is a modern philosophy which is rooted in one of these traditions against the other tradition. After all, in the Constitution, we ban untouchability. We give universal adult franchise, not only to all the marginalized sections of society, but also to women, right? I think this is clearly indicative of the fact that it is a moral document. The Constitution is a great moral document. It knows the distinction between what is good and what is bad, and what is right and what is wrong. It wants us to pursue the good, our individual good and our collective good. It wants us to pursue this good, but not at the cost of others, not by harming others, not by violating the rights of others. This is what is so central to our fundamental rights section. So this is very much like, some things that you find in not only Ashoka, but also in other emperors like Harsha, much later. My own preference is between these two traditions, and a battle that is going on between these traditions, perhaps not only in India, but in other parts of the world. My heart goes out in favor of the moral egalitarian tradition. And I hope this experiment that we started of suddenly moving away from hierarchies to establish a free egalitarian country, that would be successful. And it depends on all of us what contribution we make to make that idea bear fruit. Thank you.
Thanks, Rajeev. I think that was brilliant. And before I come in, and before we probe a little more about India as present, just a couple of thoughts. One, of course, I was reading a column by my very good friend Pratap Bhanu Mehta in Indian Express this morning, where he says so rightly that there's so much talk going on what's happening in Gaza. Can somebody please get around to doing something about it? So I think the solution lies in unleashing an Ashoka on both the Hamas as well as Benjamin Netanyahu, and maybe some sense will prevail. Who knows? Okay. That's just a thought that came to my mind. Second, an interesting point he made, this whole concept of the plurality of gods, etc., etc. And our daughter is actually a scientist in New York, and so is her husband. And when they got married in 2013, I remember one condition my daughter had that, look, I'll come and get married like an Indian princess in Jaipur or wherever you want, but we want a marriage which does not use the name of any god right through the wedding. So we are traditional Tamilian Brahmins, so we called our traditional Tamilian Brahmin priest, and he was so shocked that he said, look, I will pay you money but keep me away from this wedding. Okay. And then we said, now what do we do? And my daughter gave me a big lecture, exactly what Rajeev said. You know, the Vedic tradition never talked about the supremacy of a god, etc., etc. And interestingly, right here in Pune, we found Gyan Prabodhini. Many of you would know Gyan Prabodhini. And the two priests, the two women priests who came and conducted the wedding, followed that whole concept to the T. And we had some traditional 80-year-old uncles who first of all were horrified that a wedding could start without Om Ganeshaya Namaha. The second horrific was two women priests are going to conduct a wedding. I mean, this is the old hierarchy of problems that comes into their mind. But at the end of it, I got a certificate from my 80-year-old uncle saying this was a perfect wedding. He hasn't changed, of course. The other weddings in the family are all the traditional style. But nevertheless, I mean, you need that kind of a thinking. Now, your point, Rajeev, I mean, you write in your wonderful book about the whole concept of India being one of inclusive plurality. But you also mention, which I must probe on that. You name it. You name it. Mike.
It's a recent book published by Bloomsbury called Between Hope and Despair.
I know. Between Hope and Despair is such a wonderful series of essays. You must read it. It's actually based on what Rajeev has been writing over the last 2 years, so you must read it. So the point I was going to probe on is, you also mentioned there, and I think in your own preface, that while there is a certain disenchantment with that inclusive plurality idea of India, within the constitution there are methods by which we can take all these disenchanted folks and bring them into the mainstream. So how does one do that? And just to add to that, you said that, look, the logic lies in listening to many people. You keep your idea, I keep my idea.
Yeah.
But you watch any television channel or get on to Twitter or social media today, it's my idea which is the only right idea, and the rest of you shut up.
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile all these?
Well, I mean, I think the two very important things. One, of course, is eschew violence. Matters cannot be decided. The disagreements abound. People are bound to disagree on any issue. But if one person is shut up by force or by violence, and if the number of people who are willing to shut you up by force is much greater, then of course there is no hope. Then the idea of Bahushata is also kind of thrown out of the window. So I think we must all stand up. And here, Anu talked about Gandhi. I think this is, I mean, Gandhi is the greatest modern a person in the world, the greatest, most insightful and most morally correct, without being, correct not in the sense of being politically correct, but just morally right person. I think we should all be following him and eschew violence of all kinds. And the other is, no matter how you express yourself, whether it is through gestures, which is one of the most fundamental ways of human expression, or with the help of narratives, which is also some stories, fiction, literature, myths, or through theories, explanations, arguments. No matter how you express it, all of them should come on board and listen to one another. We all have this capacity, cultural capacity, to understand each of these expressions. We express ourselves all the time through these three modes. So for anybody to believe that theory is the best and the only way by which we should express ourselves, and everybody else is a fool, that idea should be forgotten. Likewise, people who believe in myths and stories, they should learn some respect for people who do, either normative or explanatory theories, and who want a general picture of the world, in which reason has a very important place. And more than anything, there is dance, there is mimicry, there is music, there are all kinds of ways in which you express yourself, which do not use any words, leave alone theories. And I think that's a very important way in which people express themselves. People can say many things without saying a word. And each of these types of people and each of these modes of expression and cognition that are present in each one of us should have a place in the public domain, and we should be able to understand one another. And if we do that, I think we can take a step in the right direction.
Okay, I'm very conscious we have only 10 minutes, so I'm going to ask for 3 questions stroke comments from the audience, and then, I'll take all 3 at the same time, and then request Rajeev to kind of conclude on what is his vision for India, whether he wants to talk about 2047, or in my mind, I don't see that far off. So I can tell you my view on 2030, but let's get those 3 questions first. Yeah, Uma, go ahead.
Rajeev, that was a brilliant exposition of who were we and where are we and where we could be. This really poses a question in my mind. If you look at the whole of Latin America, because of the successive Spanish invasion, today we don't see any kind of authentic culture which existed at one point of time, including the languages, the literature. Almost everything is gone in that part of the continent. Whereas in India, we have had successive waves of invasion, including the last long stint of the British. But still we have managed to continue to preserve our culture and tradition. So what is the reason for that?
I'll come back to that, Rajeev. Amit, just pass it.
Thank you, Rajeev. Wonderful insights, and thanks, Ganesh, for moderating it so well. Non-violent communication is a brand new term that has come to me recently, and is there any comment on that? And number 2, very importantly, your message should reach the schools and colleges. What are you doing to spread that message besides writing the books?
Just pass it across to Manish. Anybody else has a question?
Rajeev, question is, you concluded your talk with more tolerant community or society. So my question is it going to be more tolerant or more balanced? Balanced.
Just pass it here, Manish.
I have a question. Schools require children in class KG or 1 or 2, they are sent a form is sent to the parents where they have to say what religion and what religion do you believe in? Does the child belong to? This is before the child knows what God is. So how can we change that so that children can at least imagine what they expect of what they think faith should be, because otherwise it's imposed, and anything that's imposed is not thought of. You've not examined it in any way. How can we reach out and change this school activity that's happening apparently for the board exams they needed, and they get it from the children when they're in KG or class 1?
Can you just pass it down to the children? No, only 5. I said 3, but you're making it 5.
जो 4 पुरुषार्थ है और 6 विकार है, उसको हम सोशल एनालिसिस में कैसे ला सकते हैं, सोशल थ्योरी में?
फिर से पूछिए।
काम, अर्थ, मोक्ष, 4 पुरुषार्थ और 6 विकार, इसको सोशल एनालिसिस में कैसे देख सकते हैं?
Go ahead.
I hope I remember. First of all, I think the only way in which children learn something is by example. No matter how many times you say something to them, they will not really pick it up. That's something which happens only much later. Instruction, formal classroom. Certainly behavior and virtues and vices, they're learned by direct experience and observation. So parents play a very important role. Teachers play an extremely important role in school. And I would say that if we want our children to develop certain qualities, certain virtues, a character, then we ourselves have the duty to embody that as parents and as teachers. So more than anything else, I would say that that's the only way in which we can achieve that. It's very unfortunate that people are taught in this religious identity is being imposed on people. Even before children begin to think, they're already told that this is what they are, and that's how that they must remain. It's only later that some of them manage to quit. But quitting quitting means that you cease to be at least partly what you have been, and you acquire something new. But we've had a tradition in the past, and that is where I go back to the gods and goddesses of even the Vedic period, and the ancient pluralist imaginary. Sorry to use this term, imaginary, but I don't know how else to explain this. Where, and Gandhiji talked about it. See, where, and it was also implicit in something that I said, that in Ashoka, that you take something from me, but don't leave what you already have. There's something valuable in that. So Gandhi was against conversion. By conversion, he did not mean that you shouldn't learn from others. By conversion, you mean don't leave something which is yours completely and adopt something else. That's a permanent change. But in that permanent change, you have to erase everything that you had. Why should that be the case? But why is it not possible for us to have more than one allegiances, more than one attachments? Why can't we have multiple? And this goes, we all, there is a whole tradition in India where we have multiple gods and goddesses. We do not shun one and take the other. I think that is a very unfortunate development that took place in some religious traditions in the world. And that legacy is something that we should not, I'm not saying we should decry it in the sense that we have to respect in some ways, but I don't think that is worth emulating. I don't think this idea of Garbhapsi, for example, is a very good idea. I think we should ask people to be what they are and also become Hindus, not to cease to be. So that's my take on religion. Now, your question, which is, no, I think the Constitution is our modern dharma. And that's the swarup that dharma has taken for us, which is for everybody, which treats everybody as an equal. And the pursuit of artha, which is extremely important, and the pursuit of kama, which is also important, both these pursuits, the pursuit of these goals, should be under the guidance of dharma. Meaning thereby a dharma which is valid for everybody and which doesn't exclude anybody. So I think, and moksha is also something which can be done. I mean, it's not just success in this world or pleasure in this world, but the highest good in this world or in some other world. That's what moksha is, right? All the pursuit of all these can be done within the framework of a dharma which is acceptable to everybody, from which no one feels excluded. And that's why I'm a great votary of the Constitution. Not that it is the ultimate document, it's a revisable document. As we know, it's a human invention, right? But then every religious scripture is a human invention. No matter what people say, that is revealed and God, it's always constructed by human beings. Right? We really don't know if there is God and if God said what he or she said. But we know that the Constitution is something that we've constructed, we built. So I think that's my rough answer to your question. There were 2 or 3 other questions, but now I'm, but no, I want to answer. Umaji's question was, what was it? Oh yeah. I mean, no, this is exactly the problem. I mean, this is the great difference between Asia and Asian traditions. It's not. I mean, go to Japan. We were talking about Japan, right? I mean, Shinto and Buddhists, they both coexist. In China, there are at least 3 ways of life, which are sought to be destroyed by the Communist Party of China, unfortunately, because that is taking on the exclusivist tradition. It is the sole possessor of truth, right? It had other good things, but this idea that we possess the truth and others are false, that's a terrible idea. It's but in Chinese don't actually follow that. I mean, there is Taoist, and there is Confucian, and there is Buddhist, and there are 3 ways of life, and every Chinese is happy to follow each of these 3 ways. They've probably demarcated it, for this will be Confucian, for this will be Taoist, for this will be Buddhist, but all of them. And likewise in India, there are so many communities, unfortunately they're dying now under the onslaught of a certain kind of horrible nationalism that was born not just now, but in the early 20th century, where religious nationalism. So the entire Mio community in Haryana, half of them, many of their names were Ram Muhammad. They were reciting the Quran and they were following the Ramayana, right? I mean, and if you go to the imperial gazetteers, when they went to Punjab and when they talked to Hindus or Sikhs, many of them on one occasion said they were Sikhs, and on another occasion they said they were Hindus. And the imperial gazetteers always felt that these are people who are unreliable, cheats, who are deliberately kind of deluding the officials. But they were just being genuine. They didn't put too much emphasis on this, categorization. They thought that they were both. In the Sikh case, everybody still, even today, this is the case. In the Muslim case, I mean, there are so many Sanskrit Pandits who happen to be Muslims. I don't know if you remember the case. I was totally befuddled by what happened in Banaras University, when there was a Muslim who was appointed a teacher of Sanskrit. But there was an agitation and he was forced to step down. Now, how mad can that be? Why should that be the case? Why should a Muslim not be? I know my friends in Bengal, half their teachers, they learned Sanskrit from their Muslim, Maulanas or clergies. So, I mean, this is common. This used to be common. Tarashiko translating the Upanishads, right? It was not just a one-off thing. It was something which was done by a number of people. There's a whole tradition of that in India. So I think this accommodation of acceptance, I wouldn't call it toleration. It's more than toleration, right? It's kind of respectful acceptance of the other is so much a part of I won't even call it just the Indian, but the Asian tradition, Pan-Asian tradition, and India has been one of the pioneers in that. And to reject that and to adopt something which may have its usefulness at one time in some parts of the world, but which is utterly useless, is morally obnoxious, is something which I wouldn't recommend at all. And I think some of the greatest disasters that have taken place in Latin America or in Tasmania, of course these are imperial conquests, but there's a tinge of religion in it, right? A tinge of the conversion and taking them to this side, or else kill them. right? Annihilate them if they don't become yours. Those are things that have never been part of the Indian cultural landscape until the 20th century or maybe late 19th century. And I think we would be, joining with, I shouldn't say this, but joining with really the baddies if we were to succumb to this.
No, great. I mean, we are done. The organizers are giving me dirty looks. So, no, please catch Rajeev immediately after the session. He's still here. He can't be evaporated into the atmosphere. So, catching them. Let me just conclude by saying you are missing my brilliant 5-minute summary on the future of India. But if you do want to listen to it, stay on till the 4 o'clock session. Okay. But let me just conclude with one line from the book Pathways to India, which I'm sure is available outside if you want it. And that was by my good friend Ravi Pandit, who's of course a Pune entrepreneurial veteran and who is still running one of Pune's most successful companies, KPIT. And he's written an interesting line on what is a developed city. So common wisdom would have it that a developed city, I mean, we all know the traffic chaos in our lovely city of Pune, but a developed city could be where everybody has their own 2-wheeler, 4-wheeler, we have all transportation. But the real definition of a developed city is where everybody gives up their cars and takes public transport. So this is a pitch for my friend Shravan Hardikar, who's trying to run Maha Metro with dwindling capacity utilization in this city. Please take the metro. Thank you very much.